Hey guys, and welcome to the next episode of the Grip Performance Podcast. Today, the format for the episode is a little bit different. We're going with a Q&A style. I think there's lots of topics that we could talk on for a long time, but I figured it might be good to sort of cover a couple of different topics in one thing because the recent episodes have been quite dense, which I think is normally the format in which we just speak in day to day anyway. But with this one, it's not going to be rapid fire because I feel like any sort of contextual information that's provided rapid fire isn't really contextual. So we'll spend a little bit of time on each of the questions, but just know it'll sort of bounce around a little bit. We've got Phil, fresh off his recent lecturing gig with Luke Lehman down. Where did you go for it?
Down in Melbourne.
Down in Melbourne. And what were you talking to the crew down there about?
So we presented to about 26 different coaches from around the country that flew into Melbourne to talk about what we call the art of coaching. So the differences between, programming versus coaching and actually understanding how behaviors are formed and how habits are formed. I did it with a really good friend of mine, Grace Britton, who's a psychologist here in Newcastle. And she presented the clinical forms of behavior formation and habit formation, and more of the behind the scenes stuff that happens from a mental perspective. Mm-hmm. And I presented more of the practical, how to take the clinical information and apply it to the coaching world, I suppose you would say. Yeah. So when coaches talk to their clients, they understand how habits formed, how behaviors form, and also the why behind it, but then how to actually make those modifications to help people actually progress in a long-term format.
Yeah. So like a lot of the discussion around the programming versus coaching type thing, human first coaching.
Yeah. One of the things that we wanted to do in this particular course was not necessarily go out of the gate to start, dismissing AI and things like that. So we actually started. It was a 2-day seminar, and we actually started the first day with how AI can be integrated positively into the business. So using things like certain prompting or certain back of house scenarios, or even things like what's called behavioral nudging, where you're sending reminders automatically to your clients to let them know certain positive habits and things like that. Even things like evaluations and data setting, but really identifying where AI sort of lacks some of the data points. So for example, the emotional connection, understanding person's lifestyle, position, fatigue, all of these things. Because at the current position, AI only really works off data. Yeah. It can't assess a person's current situation or need to shift that empathetic position.
Mm-hmm, for sure. I mean, in the CrossFit space, I think the thing that the coaching provides more than anything is just that visual review of movement, that visual review of performance to sort of dictate where it goes, because sometimes the numbers aren't always representative of the direction in which you should send that person in. Yeah, I know in a CrossFit context. So.
Yeah, I mean, and well, to be honest, CrossFit and all training, but CrossFit in particular, because obviously there's multiple disciplines, multiple formats that CrossFit work in, whether it be strength, attainment, endurance, metabolic conditioning, all of these things. But
skill acquisition, very.
But even tracking, like what AI can do for us is track data. Like, for example, it can combine the information given to us with sleep, with hunger, with energy, with fatigue, with recoverability, and then pair that with things like blood pressure, heart rate, HRV, and it can combine those metrics to form injury risk, whereas a coach may not necessarily know how to combine or may not be good enough with maths to figure those progressions out. Yeah. The data sets, AI can apply those. But again, it can't look at, hey, is their heart rate slightly elevated? Is their fatigue slightly elevated because they're not sleeping because they've got a newborn at home, or if they got if they got a parent staying with them, they've been traveling more often? Is their workload more stressful? Yeah. These are things where a coach can step in and go empathetically, hey, maybe now isn't the time to push you quite as hard. Whereas the AI might assess the numbers and go, no, this person can push hard. Well, hang on a second. What's their situation? Yeah. What's their rating of fatigue based on their current lifestyle? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a super interesting conversation. So I'm sure everyone that attended that seminar gained a lot of value from that. Because I know me and you have spoken on it a couple of times previously, and every time that we do, it's always an enjoyable chat. Yeah. But for today, we'll take like a bit of a pivot, and I'll read through some of the questions that we've got. The first few are probably more around like the body composition side of things and training, which I know I get lots of questions on just in general. So we'll sort of go through one by one. We're not really going to set a time limit on it. We'll sort of just riff as we go through, and this will sort of be a good prompt for people in the future. Any of the questions that you guys send us via DM, whether it's myself or Phil, we could use for a topic in the future. And that's essentially what this is. This wasn't something that I sent out and had it as like a direct Q&A. It was more like, what are the questions that we've been asked essentially since we started talking by people in the gym or that we've been sent, and like, you know what, that's what we're doing for a Q&A. Because I know sometimes you put out the box and people are afraid to ask questions, right? Yeah. Whereas it's more likely that they DM you or they bring it up in conversation in person and so on and so forth. So
yeah, I mean, I always say never be afraid to ask questions, particularly if those boxes are put out and you're opening the forum, because if you have that question, the good chance is someone else has that question too.
100%.
And you know, when you start to see the open the door access to questions, they start to cascade in, but it's always that first person, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to be that guy or that girl. Be that guy, be that girl. That's what these forums are for.
Yeah. You see it even when you've done the seminars in person, like for our camps, like prior to Down Under, it's like normally once one person asks a question, it like breaks the ice and then everyone like follows suit. Because,
that's right. Yeah.
You know, it's like people don't want to be the first person. They don't want to say something stupid. And then when they realize the questions that get asked are generally just like layman's term general questions that they've probably also had, they're like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I'm comfortable to ask that question. So to start us off, this is one that I'm sure we go back and forth with people very commonly, but I want to get leaner, but I don't want to inhibit my performance in training. What can I do to assist in maintaining my performance while still, you know, I'm going to add on top of this, while still, you know, chasing body composition goals related to being leaner and fat loss?
Sure. One of the biggest things you can do is obviously, we're all aware of calories in versus calories out, right? You must exert more calories than you consume in order to create a calorie deficit, and that's how you lose weight. The biggest thing there, it's reasonable to understand, or at least to assume, that your performance will drop if you have a lower calorie intake. So what are the prerequisites of CrossFit? Higher energy output, higher energy demand, typically in the higher end of effort, so up above that 75 to 80%. In previous conversations, we've discussed the need for carbohydrates in that upper echelon of energy demands. Yeah. So with that in mind, the way we can do it is actually shift the carbohydrate feeding window to be not primarily, well, not wholly and solely, but primarily peri-workout, meaning before, intra, and post. There's a few reasons why we do that. First off, by going pre, we're providing energy when the demand is required. So we're providing carbohydrates to that individual as they lead into the period of time in which they need them. We're also topping up a little bit of carbohydrate through the session if the session happens to be a little bit longer than, let's say, a normal CrossFit class, or if they're doing additional training. And the post-training, we can prioritize that as a secondary thought because we want to try and restore the fuel content of that person's muscle in the immediate period when the body's like a giant sponge. Mm-hmm. But then we start to lower the calories in the latter half of the day, or for that matter, maybe the first half of the day, depending on when they train, in order to allow the body to shift towards fat oxidation.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is the burning, which is the utilization of fats as fuel.
Yeah, for sure. So like when I get asked this question in reference, it's very much essentially what you just touched on, right? Yeah. So nutrient timing as a priority, right? So ensuring that you're prioritizing putting the carbohydrates that you have allocated for your energy intake around when it's going to make a difference, right? Because by timing that at other parts of the day, yes, you'll still hit your fat loss orientated goals.
Yeah.
But we're talking about maintaining performance. Yeah. And it's been shown that like how, I guess, the positive effect that carbohydrates and nutrient timing has around nutrition, how that's able to sustain performance, right? Like even in a deficit, by implementing that, the actual drop off is going to be less. And like there is obviously external factors depending on, you know, the time in which you've been in a deficit. The other thing to consider is a less aggressive deficit is obviously going to, you know, reduce the amount of performance drop off that you have. So sort of depending on the demands, the timeline of things that you have. And, you know, you can sort of bucket athletes, right? You might have the athlete who went through an off-season strength phase and they tried to gain a bunch of weight so they could, you know, representatively lift more weight through that period. And then you sort of have the everyday class goer who's just using CrossFit as the means of exercise to lose weight, right? Yeah. So there's those two sort of camps. When it comes to the athlete, you know, there's probably a pretty high chance that once they return to in-season training, that just that training volume going up is going to, you know, elicit some level of fat loss. But in saying that as well, nutrient timing still applies. Prioritizing things like sleep and, you know, adequate protein intake, they're also going to make a huge difference. And then for that person who's, you know, just sort of using CrossFit as, once again, their means of exercise, you probably can, you know, extend that deficit duration out a little bit longer because you're probably not considering or even, you could be a little bit more aggressive because you're not, considering any sort of like competitions that are coming up or any sort of like, peaking structures where the energy demands of that is going to be quite high.
Yeah, there are 2 points to expand on there. First one is the competitor or a person who has gone out of their way to put themselves into a significant surplus in the off season to, as you said, gain strength or acquire, a great ability to lift. When we actually start to bring them down, this pretty much is universal, but specifically for those people, but again, universal where needed, is you actually want to go against what we said in one of our last episodes. You actually want to increase the protein a little bit more, because as we go into a deficit, we don't want to, have any sort of metabolic cost towards any muscle accrual. So we've obviously gone through a period of gaining muscle during the off season. If we put ourselves into a deficit, particularly a very high deficit or a sharp deficit, we're going to potentially do that at a cost of some muscle, some lean tissue. So by increasing the protein intake around the period of deficit, particularly if you're not necessarily a overly large person or you've got a very small amount of body fat, you want to actually make sure you're increasing the protein to protect or further protect that lean muscle that's been gained in the off season. When it comes to a person who is coming into an in-season position, there are 2 ways to do this. You can do it in a sharp, hard deficit, so a very large deficit, so somewhere between 40 and 45% for a shorter window of time. Or like you said, you can do it in a slower, more defined deficit for a longer period of time. Now, there used to be a pretty significant argument against one versus the other, and you lived in 2 camps.
Yeah.
There are sort of 2 things to consider. One is if you do a large deficit, so 40 to 45%, the reality is you have to do it in a short window of time before any psychological onset of, distortion or sort of impact on their performance can actually occur. So before the pre-season would occur, if that makes sense. If you're going to do a longer set of deficit, you have to do it in a smaller deficit, somewhere between, say, 10 to 20% for a longer period of time. And you have to, again, as you just said before, prioritize the carbohydrates into that peri-workout window. If you're going to do a sharp deficit, though, a very large deficit, that has to be discussed with the athlete, and you may have to taper or alter their performance and their training demands during that period of time.
Yeah. And it requires a certain avatar as well, right?
Yeah.
Like to push someone into that realm, it's like they're probably going to have a decent understanding of nutrition.
Yeah.
They're probably going to have already pretty solid foundations of habits and routines. Yeah. And ideally, like you said, you've educated them surrounding what the expectations to their training might look like. Because as much as we're talking about trying to reduce the performance drop-off in something as significant as that, there probably will be in some aspects, but there might be improvement in others. Like you might find, my gymnastics feels so great. That comes out, as their weight's coming down. But some of those heavier lifts or their ability to sort of reach higher sustained outputs in workouts might drop off. Yeah. But as long as, I guess, the expectations are clear around that and that it is a temporary phase in terms of to sort of get body composition to an optimal state to perform in the season, then I think there's more buy-in for that.
Yeah, and why I tend to sort of say that there's 2 camps, or at least there was 2 camps, and there are still people who sit firmly on either side of that line, is because we used to think that if you diet aggressively, so a very large deficit, you would lose a much larger degree of lean tissue. So you'd lose what we call mixed tissue, which is a combination of fat mass as well as glycogen as well as muscle tissue. And then if you do it more progressively or slower with a smaller deficit, you would most likely lose a greater amount of fat mass versus, say, lean tissue. But of course, the trade-off is the diet has to go for a much longer period of time. Yeah. The newer theory behind it is you will actually lose equivalency. So what I mean by that is, although the aggressive dieting is going to be a much shorter window of time, and you will lose more fat, but you will also cost more lean tissue, it's relative to the shift in duration. Yeah. Okay. Now, it is slightly higher. You have to admit that it is slightly higher when you do of lean tissue loss when you do it aggressively, but not so much that it's going to affect most people versus a longer duration. Yeah. But where the cost will come will be that performance cost.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then I guess the opposite of the trade-off is you're dieting for an extended period of time, which some people just don't enjoy doing. It's harder to get
That's
by,
right.
and you're still fighting the same, like maybe not as intense when it comes to like the hunger signals, but you're still doing that for an extended period, right? There's more margin for error. You're still fighting off those same sort of like, fluctuations in ghrelin and leptin, like as the progresses through a long period of time as well.
There's also just diet fatigue. Diet fatigue is a real thing. So diet fatigue, guys, is a bit of a misused term, but basically it's just your body pushing against the dieting phase. So it could be, like Tyson just said, increases in hunger signaling, for example. So ghrelin is the principal hormone that's responsible for hunger signaling. Leptin is the principal hormone responsible for satiation or fullness. But there are a whole host of other signals as well. You might get, for example, an overshoot in your decrease of metabolic rate. So your body actually lowers its metabolic need or demand based on the duration of the diet. And that's called metabolic adaptation. Well, the research doesn't suggest, it outright states that your body's decline in metabolic rate will occur greater than what is mathematically programmed. So your body, if you calculate, your body should go from, let's use hypothetical numbers here, 2,000 calories a day to 1,500 calories a day, you're more likely to get a decrease to say 1,200 calories a day.
Yeah.
Your body almost over prepares itself for a famine position because that's what dieting is. Remember, dieting is essentially voluntary famine.
Yeah.
So you are doing that voluntarily. Also, things like food drive increase. So your want, not hunger, hunger's different, but your food drive, your demand for what's called hyperpalatable foods. Yeah. Hyperpalatable foods are foods that contain 2 or more of salt, sugar, acid, or fat. They're the 4 hyperpalatabilities. Those things will actually be higher the longer duration of dieting.
So it's very much a, what did you say last week? You're saying not contextually applicable, something.
Oh, situationally appropriate.
Situationally appropriate, that's the one.
I was going to say spit in the system.
But situationally appropriate, right? So depending on, the bucket in which you fall in, of the type of athlete you are, and also the time of year, and even just the relevance to why that's occurring. Like, is it a health thing? Is it a confidence? Like, this is just a goal of mine? Or is it something more related to the sport, right? Where it's like, all right, I'm probably, as a guy, it's like I'm sitting above 100 kilos. I probably need to get closer to that mid 90 and be a little bit leaner because I'm probably just carrying, excess body fat here. And that isn't conducive to performance in CrossFit, right? Like in strongman and stuff like that, where there is way more like pushing and pulling and just body weight has a factor. Whereas in CrossFit, the percentage of that compared to say gymnastics and just like monostructural things is way more in favor. So carrying excess body fat isn't very conducive to performance.
No, there is one more method of dieting which is probably more applicable to your CrossFit class goers rather than the athlete, but it's called cyclical dieting. And this is where you predetermine a window of time of a deficit and then back to a period of maintenance. So for example, you might do the most famous or sort of well-known version of this is 2 and 2. So you diet a person quite aggressively, some in the vicinity of 50% of their deficit for 2 weeks, and then you bring them back to maintenance for 2 weeks, and you do it again for 2 weeks, and then back over and over and over again for a period of time. There are 2 reasons as to why this may be beneficial for some people, but again, this is not applicable to athletes. It's just for the class goers. Is because one, mentally, there's what's called a temporal landmark, meaning that you have a period of time in which you're looking for where a line is drawn, where you either start the diet or finish the diet. Second to that is it minimizes the onset of that metabolic adaptation I talked about, because every 2 weeks, your body is getting reset back to maintenance, which means any decline has been minimized or mitigated. Thirdly, it allows a person to actually have an offset or a reprieve from that dieting period, which then both physiologically brings them back up to standard. And I'm not talking about metabolically, but physiologically. So any sort of downturn in things like hormone production, any upturn in things like hunger seeking, food drive, all of these things gets mitigated. But also, again, it's only really applicable for the class goers versus athletes, because you will have an impact on your performance during that 2 weeks of deficit because the deficit is so large.
Yeah, nutrition periodization pretty much, and just being intelligent with selection depending on the avatar, the time of year, goal, so on and so forth. All right.
Yeah, but also one thing too is, and you sort of briefly went over this at the start, Tyson, is when a person is eating at maintenance for their off season and they move into on season, if you maintain that calorie intake, what was previous their maintenance, it may actually turn into a slight deficit. Which can just start to shave body fat ever so slightly off the athletic individual.
Yes. All right, next one. Ready? So I've been dieting to drop my body weight coming into the open, and I'm returning to maintenance. So I feel like I can perform. Am I going to gain weight?
Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
So this is like me like copy and pasting from my coach RX. So I've been dieting to drop my body weight coming into the open, and I'm returning to a maintenance. So I feel like I can perform, right? So obviously this person's been dieting, and now that it's coming up to a period of where they are, ideally trying to perform during the open.
Sure.
And they said, am I going to gain weight? So obviously they've dropped body fat through this period, and now they're going to return to maintenance. What can they expect to happen?
There are two things. The first one is provided you return to your new maintenance, and this is a really good point. Even falling back to the last question, when you return to your maintenance, you must return to your new prescribed maintenance. So if you've gone through a period of dieting, let's be generous and say you've lost 10 kilos, your maintenance prior to your dieting window to where it is now will have shifted because you've lost mass. Correct. Not fat or tissue or muscle, just mass in general, because weight moves weight, right? So provided you actually go back to your current maintenance, not your previous maintenance, you shouldn't gain too much weight. Now, I do say that term too much because that brings me to the second point. There could be a small window of time where there's a slight rebound, because if you have been dieting for an extended period of time, that metabolic adaptation may have occurred. So your body's metabolic rate could have slightly reduced for a temporary period of time. When you return to maintenance, it may bounce up for a short window for up to 2 weeks, and then it'll come back down again.
Correct.
Okay. So with that in mind, there are a couple of things you can do. And I really despise the concept of reverse dieting because I think it's done really, really poorly. But you can bounce twice. So let's use numbers here, okay? You've gone from 2,500 calories a day. You've dropped down to 2,000 calories a day, which is a 20% drop. When you go back up to 2,500 again, you would go 2,250 and then 25. Now, why that's applicable is because when you go from 2,000 to 2,250, you're still technically in a deficit, but it's a much smaller deficit, but it starts your body to ramp everything up again. Okay, then we bounce up to 2,500 and you're solid. If you go from 2,000 back up to 2,500, your body may have slowed to say 1,900. So when you go back to 2,500, it'll very briefly register that as a small surplus until the body turns everything back up again. And then it'll go back to normal.
And there is also something to be said about you're just increasing your food, right? There's food weight to be accounted for. There's increased carbohydrates, which is obviously going to draw in more water. So it's like you can expect that to change. Is that all going to be body fat? No.
No, that's actually a good point too. You'll put on, you'll store additional glycogen, you'll hold additional water, all of these things. But another thing, and this is getting a little bit in the weeds now, but I will mention anyway. When you go back up again from 2,000 to 2,500, what's going to occur is your body's natural movement will go up as well, because your body has gone through a period of famine or voluntary famine. Again, that's what dieting is. So what's occurred is your body has down-regulated its unconscious movement, what is commonly called these days as NEAT. When we put more food back in again, your body will upregulate its unconscious movement or NEAT, and you'll just move more. So you might find you talk with your hands more like I am here. You might find you fidget more, you bounce more. All of these things are things that happen during the dieting phase, and they reverse themselves in the maintenance phase. So even though I've said, hey, listen, you might put a small amount of weight on initially, in some people, that additional increase is actually taken up by the change in movement. So the return of increased unstructured movement or unconscious movement, therefore there is no weight gain.
It's offset.
It's offset. That's right.
Sure. Next one. I know I need to gain weight to improve my competitive performance for CrossFit, but I struggle with eating enough. What are your tips for someone who is busy, training hard, and trying to gain weight?
Sure. Put simply, liquid nutrition. Like utilize the liquid options where you can. I actually work with a young girl. She's a competitive sport aerobics. If you know what that is, it's the 1980s style aerobics, but done very, very athletically. Like these people are insanely athletic. She's a physiotherapist herself. She's very busy. In the afternoons, between lunch and her afternoon sessions, she has a popper, so a juice box, as Victorians call them, of orange juice and an up and go. And that's a way to increase her by 400 calories a day. Okay. Now she does one, goes and sees a patient, comes back, does the other one, goes and sees a patient, right? So it's a really easy way to increase calories without actually having to sit down and tolerate high food volume.
And like it's one of those things too where there's a level of accountability in it. You know that goal is there, and you're not going to just, if you're someone who's already under eating, you're not going to just develop the cues, like the hunger cues or the ability to just remember to eat without enforcing some sort of system or plan, right? Whether that is literally that, like having a plan that a coach is giving you, setting alarms, doing things that are like tracking as a form of accountability. Yeah. Because that's what I find a lot of the time where people like, I know I need to eat more, I just forget. And it's like, all right, well, you've answered the question in your response. It's like, if you're forgetting, what systems do you have in place to counter that, right? There's people who I understand obviously have very dense work jobs, right? Or like the density of their work is like combined to the point where they maybe can't eat as frequently as someone like me, who just, sits at a desk essentially. So it's like, what are the things that you're going to do to counteract that? It's like, are we looking to, front load or back load, like you said, increase liquid calories with the meals? It's like, if you're already eating X amount of meals a day and you're like, well, I get breakfast, I get smoko lunch before I train afternoon, then it's like, well, if you've got 4 or 5 meals that you're currently eating with a super busy day, what's something you can add to that? Like you said, liquid calories, right?
Yeah, but also from a structural point of view, like liquid calories are good for a period of time, and then there's a point we have to introduce whole food, right? Because as calories go up, nutrient density must also go up, because we offset the person's physical output with their need for nutrient density. So a person who trains 6 days a week and does multiple sessions a day, some of those days requires more magnesium than a person who sits on the couch all day. So as we go up in calories, we must also go up in a relative increase in micronutrient demand as well. So liquid calories are a great place to start, but also look at your food conversation too. So if I can use my hands for 1 second, we have 2 categories. We have food density, or let's say caloric density, and we have food volume. When we go up in calories, we want to increase person's caloric density first, using, as the name suggests, foods that have higher caloric density to them. And then we get them used to those calories, then we go up in food volume. And then when you go up again, higher in caloric density, we go up in food volume. So it could be as simple as, for example, let's use a really easy one, overnight oats. They add some slivered almonds, or they add some crushed flaxseed, for example, or some chia seeds to their overnight oats. It's a really easy way to add a few more calories to the exact same dish with little to no noticing of that person. It could be a conversation of using whole fat milk versus skim milk. It could be using, one fruit instead of a different fruit. For example, if they're a person who lives on blueberries and raspberries, change to peaches, pears, apples, things like that, because those have more carbs, but the actual food volume won't necessarily be higher. It could be, for example, putting a slice of cheese or a different type of spread on their lunchtime sandwich. These are things which are going to positively impact that person's need for more calories without actually having a high demand of food volume.
And the peri-workout nutrition conversation comes into play here again, right? It is that introduction of some sort of intra-workout carbohydrate as well, right? Like that's another easy one, especially like, in the context of CrossFit, a lot of the time when people are trying to gain weight, it's probably because there is a strength deficit, right? Like the heavy bars don't move as well as you wish they would. And so you're trying to gain weight to essentially offset that. So you're probably doing more strength training anyway to focus on that. So the peri-workout nutrition, introducing some sort of carbohydrate while you're training, can definitely also help with increasing calories, but also just, improving your performance.
I had this great conversation with a young sports dietitian on the weekend in Melbourne at the seminar, and it was great to see a clinician. We had some physiotherapists, some osteopaths, and dietitians attend the seminar as well, which is excellent. And she was coaching a young Australian competitive level taekwondo athlete, and we were talking about post workout and things like that. And she mentioned the old chocolate milk additive, and she said, "Oh, I love chocolate milk," and I love chocolate milk too. In fact, it's a fantastic post-workout recovery product, and there are various reasons as to why that is, but it's almost not complete, but one thing you can do with chocolate milk is you can add to it. You can add a little bit more dextrose and dissolve that dextrose in the chocolate milk. You can add a little bit more protein powder to it if you need to. You can add some Himalayan salt, or it doesn't need Himalayan salt, but just salt in general. And you can add some density to a product the person is already accustomed to. These are things you can enhance a food item and not necessarily use the food item in its original source. So you're essentially building on the things that they're already utilizing, right? It's already there. It's like the whole, if the habit's already built, just habit stacking, essentially, right? ABC, right? Anchor behavior celebration.
Cool. All right. So for the next one, I know I need to eat more to fuel my training and build muscle, but I'm afraid of gaining body fat. So I guess contextually, we've got an athlete who is, I mean, this may lead into like the Reds LEA sort of like conversation there as well, but as an athlete who is currently under eating, so they know that, you know, they potentially enter sessions feeling flat. Maybe they just know that they've tracked their intake and they're like, this is below what it should be, right?
Sure.
But I'm afraid that if I start to increase the amount of food that I eat, that I'm going to gain body fat, right? What does the conversation look like with you and an athlete that's come to you to improve their performance, but this is something that they're talking about?
There are two. Can I answer this twice?
Yeah, we'll spend a bit of time on this one.
So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to put my clinical hat on first.
Yeah.
I have to get them out of danger.
Yeah.
Okay. My registration and insurance tells me got to do that. So let's get them out of danger first. So how do we do that? Well, first thing we do is we provide something which is going to mitigate injury risk. And unfortunately, the simplest way to do that is pre-workout carbs.
Yeah.
Because if we can maintain blood glucose into the workout, we're going to minimize the onset of fatigue. We're going to minimize any detriment in things like decision-making, concentration, changes in irritability. That means the movement patterns of that individual will remain of a higher quality, which means we remove the risk, or at least reduce the risk of poor motor movements, which means we reduce the risk of injury. So that's what we first do. There could also be the same conversation happening in the post-workout window for the same reason. So that's step one. And we might look at doing that to appease their belief that they may gain weight.
Yeah.
Because again, it's twofold. One, we're providing proof that carbohydrates pre-workout will be beneficial to this person, because of course their fatigue onset won't happen as fast.
Yeah.
But we're also covering our own backside by helping this person minimize the risk. From a pragmatic approach, from a realistic worldview, is I would do the same thing, but I would also add something in the afternoons in the form of something really simple like an orange juice.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, the buy-in is from the performance benefit they've felt during the session.
Love that. That's literally like exactly where I was going to go on it too. It's like you give them something that it's like they can immediately relate and see some improvement on, right? Yeah. It's like you've given them food and then they're like, they've noticed some tangible benefit to their ability to perform in a session, right? It's creating buy-in. You're not just giving them a plan that has more calories in it because they're going to immediately see that, but it's like the introduction of some small things where it's like not even tracked, it's not even implemented. It's just, hey, we're going to eat before we train. We're going to do this.
Also as well, like we don't have to, we talk about EA a lot, right? So energy availability. For those of you who aren't too sure what EA is, energy availability relates to the amount of calories per kilo a person's body has after exercise has been accounted for. So we have to take the energy demand of exercise out of the equation, and whatever's left over with their intake, we divide by their body mass, and they must sit above 30 kilocalories per kilo. Okay, now what is called optimal EA is 40 kilocalories per kilo for males or 45 kilocalories per kilo for females. We don't have to go that high because in most people that's a surplus.
Yeah.
Okay, but we have to be above what's called LEA or low energy availability, which sits at 30 kilocalories or less. Now, why is that a caveat to say it like this? Is because whatever we do, it's an estimation at best. Okay, all these people will say, I kept my athlete at this many calories. Yeah, well, you didn't. You estimated that, right? It's a mathematical equation only. There's no determined way to work that out, unless you have a metabolic ward, which you put a person into. So provided I can do an estimation where that person sits above 30 kilocalories, and in my world, I want a buffer there, so I try and go for 32 kilocalories or higher. Provided I can get that person to be above 32 kilocalories per higher, I can rest easy that I've done step one to get them out of danger.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And like, this is, to follow up, let's just say the avatar, we've passed all of the psychological aspects regarding like, the diet and nutrition side of things. And this person's just like, look, I'm, fine with food. I'm happy with how I look. I want to improve the other conversation to be had is a gaining of body fat isn't an instantaneous process.
That's right.
Right. So it's something where the deficit like that person may be in, if managed correctly with the introduction of food correctly up into a maintenance, it's like the person may gain weight, as we've mentioned before, through, increases in, carbohydrate and food. So just food weight, carbohydrates increasing, and therefore intramuscular water would increase as well. But throughout that process, the conversation is to be had is your goal to perform?
Yeah.
Right. And because if someone's coming to you with that goal, then that is once again the caveat and the conversation that needs to be had. You have a goal, you want to achieve this, for that to be the case, that our weight has to go up, or we just have to be fueling better to sort of achieve that goal. And if, that isn't something, and you have maybe more aesthetic goals, then it's like a bodybuilder saying, well, I want to compete in CrossFit, but I want to still be able to just step on a stage at any time. And you're like, look, it's probably not conducive to success. Yeah. And there's a conversation to be had around that.
It depends on the buy-in of the person. Like if this person's, there are different levels to the buy-in, right? Because a person can come and say, listen, I'm happy with where I'm at, but I know I need to change something. Yeah. They might be open to the idea of getting DEXA scans, for example, things like that. If your coach has access to harbingers or calipers, like good quality calipers, you can continually measure the person's millimeters, particularly on certain sites around their body, and demonstrate that there's no gain in those sites. Because as you said, mass on the scale will go up. It'll most likely go up to things like water retention, glycogen storage. Because if they're in LEA, their muscles aren't being filled. Yeah. And we know that 1 gram of carbohydrates brings on 3 grams of fluid, and it's actually minimum 3 grams of fluid, not 3 grams of fluid. Yeah. Okay, so all of these things will contribute to actual scale weight. Now, this is an important sort of side note. When I talk about metrics or primary metrics with an athlete or with a person in general, I'll talk about 3 different metrics. The first one is an objective metric, that is measurements. So circumferences, millimeters, if we want to add that path, for example. The second is a subjective metric. That would be things like photographs, front, profile, and rear. And the third one is the one that everyone hangs their hat on, is a scale weight. But I call that a semi-objective. And the reason why I call it semi-objective, because yes, it's a number, but it's influenced by so many things. It's influenced by hydration, by fluid retention, by menstrual cycle, by salt, by sleep function, all of these things. So
snapshot in time.
Snapshot in time, right? So it's a really important thing that if a person is willing to or wanting to fuel themselves better, but is happy with their look, it's probably best we do move into a multiple metric system in order to allow that person to observe minimal change elsewhere while there's temporary fluctuations on the scale weight. But again, it's that buy-in. If we go, hey, listen, let's just fuel your session. You let me know how you feel. We'll do that exclusively for 10 days. Yeah. And if there's no shift in how you look, let's continue that path. We're creating a buy-in where the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah. And the other thing, with controlled increases, and let's just say we get to the point where that person can have the, buy-in to be able to go into a surplus, controlling that surplus to be in a 5-10% and not like a 20% surplus, right, is also going to mitigate and offset the rate of which, there is potential fat gain or weight gain as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. Because we want to, again, going back to what I said at the start of this conversation, the metabolic adaptation for this person, or the down-regulation of the metabolism, is going to be there, most likely if a person's in LEA, but it's going to be transient. Yeah. So when we return them, by creating that initial buy-in pre-workout, or for that matter, peri-workout, we actually allow a small increase without being so large that it's going to impact the person from a visual perspective. Yeah. And we go from, let's use some rough numbers. We go from, let's say 25 kilocal from an EA perspective to 30, and there's no change. We hold at 30 for a period of time, maybe 2 weeks. Then we go from 30 to 32 or 35, we hold there. So we don't have to go from 1,500 calories to 3,000 calories. Yeah. We can jump somebody over time. I once took an ultra endurance athlete. She was actually an Iron woman. Sorry, let me correct that, Iron woman. When she came to me, she was suffering from REDS, like flat out REDS. I took her from 1,300 calories a day.
Which is, by the way,
sorry?
I said, what is REDS?
Oh, sorry. REDS is relative energy deficiency in sport. So it's like if a person stays in low energy availability for an extended period of time, they start to develop a series of physical and also psychological concerns. And it can be things like bone mineral density, it can be amenorrhea, for example, which is the absence of menstrual cycle. It can be a whole host of gut issues. There's a whole array of 20 different elements which can cause concerns. We took her from 1,300 calories a day to 4,300 calories a day, and she still didn't. She gained 1 kilo
Yeah.
That's it in the entire time. Now, people say, how is that possible? It's because her body had down-regulated so dramatically that there was a whole host of physical concerns, because your body will start to pull from systems if it's short on energy. And that includes things like muscle mass, it includes things like bone mineral density, and it can cause lifelong concerns if not rectified.
Yeah. And so like there's obviously a strategic approach to that, right? It isn't just, oh, here's what your calculated maintenance and to have you at 35 in like
eat the veggies. No.
Right?
It's much more coerced into that format. And going back to what I said a little bit earlier about, increasing food density or caloric density, then going food volume, then density, going food volume, and doing it progressively, having that person become accustomed to the higher energy, but using foods which fit their methods. And in particular, this young lady was, it's going to sound odd, but she was one of the people that jump out of helicopters and rescue people.
Yeah.
So she went out when, Mayday calls on the ocean, they would go out and rescue the people, and it was an amazing job. So we put a plan in place, and if you guys all know Nutrigrain, what's Nutrigrain's motto? Iron Man food, right? And Nutrigrain arguably is the best marketing on the Australian market, because they're not lying to you. Nutrigrain really is Iron Man food. But if you're not running an Iron Man, it's horrendous. Yeah. So what we did with her was every time she got a call out, she had to eat a small Tupperware cup of dry Nutrigrain, which is about 170 calories. Yeah. And we basically created a buy-in where she could just smash a little handful of Nutrigrain in order to have the energy to go and rescue the person. And it worked a treat. And some days she was doing 2 cups, other days she was doing 5 cups.
Yeah, right.
On her shift.
On the shift, how busy it was. Which that's not one of those jobs where you're like, oh yeah, it was super busy today. You hope it's not. All right, let's move on to the next one. So, should I carb load for the open?
No.
Okay. We added this one in. We added this one in recently.
We added this one in ourselves because what I'm seeing a lot on socials, and it's very evident that it's obviously been ChatGPT to the eyeballs. People are putting in, hey, what are the ways to prepare for a workout? But there's a big difference between a CrossFit carnival, which we've spoken about before, in relation to carb loading, or super compensating is the term we used, and a 20-minute workout in the CrossFit Open. Okay, if you're eating adequately, so the numbers we discussed previously were sort of 4 to 7 grams of carbs per kilo. If you're within that range, when it comes to a Friday or a Saturday CrossFit Open, you have more than suitable amount of carbohydrates in your system. Similarly, for most people, there will be no need to use electrolytes because the salt on your food will be suitable to compensate any loss or any rate of loss for that workout.
For sure.
So eat normally, consume your peri-workout nutrition in the form of pre-workout carbohydrates. Make sure your meal prior to the session, 4 hours prior to whenever you choose to do the open, is carbohydrate focused and more arguably lower residue, so lower fiber carbohydrate focused. You'll be more than fueled for that open. There's no need to super compensate. I read this one that said start loading 72 hours before the open. It's a 20-minute workout.
I was going to say, at most of it be a 20-minute workout. Like realistically, most of them fall between 8 and 14 minutes, which we mentioned. So like, it's not something that you need to super compensate for. Like the one, I guess, system that is consistent with the open, that is consistent with a carnival day, is maintain the same food groups. Like if you already have your ducks in a row, don't implement a new pre-workout or some random food group because you're like, oh, it's open. Maybe I should go and buy one of those energy gels or something. Something like, it's like, man, if you have a banana normally before you train and like you feel good, then do the same thing, man. Like
maintain typical food intake, maintain the carbohydrate intake. The one thing, as I said before, what I'd do is just lower the pre-workout fiber content potentially. And now I say that potentially because if you're accustomed to the food, if you're a person who can eat a whole grain sandwich at lunch and then train at 3, and you've done that for X amount of period of time, by all means, that probably tells me that you're probably fueled correctly in a typical situation. Second to that as well, if you start loading 2 to 3 days out, the chances of you actually just being in a surplus for most of the week is pretty high.
That's pretty exactly what's going to happen.
And then second to that, if you overshoot with electrolytes and carbohydrates, you could end up stiff and immobile and full of fluid, and you actually end up being slower. Okay, so just be aware that you know, those people who are doing up carousels on the open and preloading and things like that, probably ChatGPT'd it. Yeah. So really source your information selectively.
Yeah. That competition episode that we did wasn't for the open. It was for multi-day events or multi-event days.
100%.
Right. So that's where you're going to utilize that as for the open. Keep everything normal. Don't change your routine. Like you said, lower the fiber intake in that pre-workout meal, and just keep things consistent, keep things familiar. Don't throw a spanner in the works when it's not needed, and focus. You honestly get more out of keeping the same routine that you've had if, once again, your ducks are in a row and we know that your peri-workout nutrition is correct, and putting more emphasis on a specific prep or watching the strategy video that I put out. Like, you'll get more from that and having a strategic approach to your, like, you know, physical prep than you will from, you know, carb loading. And
I mean, the Ferrari pit crew doesn't suddenly put the guy on fuel on tires mid-race, right? He keeps it all the same, or they keep it all the same. So please do the same thing. Utilize your food that you like, that you know and love is successful for you. Minimize any additional salts unless you've already trained that day, which I'm assuming you haven't. And then utilize the salt or sodium content that's within your food. Do the session, and then after the sessions, after that open workout is finished, by all means prioritize, you know, post-workout carbohydrates via the methods we've used and mentioned previously. Maybe put in some electrolytes if it's a particularly hot day in the area in which you live, and go from there. Yeah,
for sure. Last one we'll do, and like this could be a long one, but we'll keep this as, you know, once again, sort of moderate to how we've had, like it could be an episode within itself. But what supplements are you generally recommending for clients as a go-to?
As in like my almost like universal supplement?
Yeah, almost universal, because obviously there's, you know, many from an individual standpoint, but maybe like some that you commonly see, universal applications. And then I guess what's the assessment process for what supplements are going to be included for someone?
Yeah, sure. So universally, magnesium. I'll do it in order if you like. So universally is creatine, creatine monohydrate more specifically. I don't go for any of the fancy creatines. In fact, nor should you. Creatine monohydrate is what the science supports and what the science suggests. In fact, some creatines actually use marketing terminology to tell you they don't work properly. So creatine monohydrate is the one you should be utilizing. Second to that, if a person is sort of more of an everyman CrossFitter, I would look at probably a magnesium source, but a lower level, and then maybe some fish oils for general health as well. If a person, and then I would limit it there. If they require, or their protein demands, you know, indicate they need a protein powder, I would definitely lean into that as well. But in saying that, though, protein powders are supplements that are, you know, to boost protein intake. They're not essential. If a person is an athlete, I would use the first three. So creatine monohydrate, magnesium, and omegas. And then obviously I would most likely definitely have a protein powder in their needs. The reason why the difference lies is because athletic individuals in the CrossFit space are generally training twice a day. Boosting protein in a liquid form alleviates a lot of that gut concern or that gut comfort. So it really helps in that regard because it's a fast digesting protein source, helps that initiate that recovery window much sooner than say a whole food source would. I may also look at additional, you know, conversations around multi-minerals, for example. So multivitamin, multi-mineral product. In that regard, I do recommend Thorne Research Advanced Nutrients because it's the most complete multivitamin on the market.
Not a sponsor, but
look, universally, Thorne Research.
Thorne is good, yeah.
Thorne Research, and to a lesser extent, there's a brand called Sport Research, which are equally as good but a little bit cheaper. They're the ones I tend to sort of recommend. Depending on where a person lives or what their exposure to sunlight is, vitamin D is almost universal as well. Sometimes K2, and you can get D3 and K2 collectively. I think particularly in cooler climates or coming out of a winter window of time, the winter season, D3 is almost non-negotiable for most people. For those of you who are listening outside of, say, southeast New South Wales, you have to remember that vitamin D is synthesized dependent even on the angle of the sun and where you live. So longitude and latitude will change how your body synthesizes vitamin D. And if you want to go into the really nitty-gritty stuff, if a person tends to be sort of more prone to things like cramping, for example, we would look at electrolytes, or alternatively, we look at things like taurine, which will help to soften or just reduce the sensation of connective tissue. So just like reduce the electrical signals of connective tissue. And then if the person is really prone to reactivity when it comes to cramping, we would look at things like pickle juice.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just glad you said that. Tyke's probably listening. He's like, hell yeah, pickle juice. As far as the magnesium comment goes as well, do you have a preference of source? Because I know you said lower level for like a class goal, but you were probably referring to dosage more than quality, right?
Yeah,
so what's
dosage.
the actual the type of magnesium that you're recommending?
So interestingly, I've actually changed my opinion on this in the last couple of months. So previously, the research suggested magnesium chelate or the bond. So when you talk about magnesium, you're talking about magnesium citrate or magnesium glycinate or whatever the connection is. That connection to an amino acid, so in glycinate's glycine connected to magnesium, that's called a chelate. It's spelled chelate, but it's pronounced chelate. It was commonly thought or widely believed that the magnesium form would determine where that magnesium would travel in the body.
Yeah.
That's been somewhat challenged in the recent months. And what they're actually saying is that when the magnesium chelate goes into the gut actually partitions it, so splits it.
Yeah.
And then, for example, the glycine portion goes to where it needs to go, and the magnesium goes in as a universal base. Now, logically, everyone knew that, but there was still evidence to suggest that the magnesium would travel to where it needs to go based on what chelate has actually been, been attached to it. What the new evidence is saying that is actually the connective amino acid that actually does the thing that we thought it would do. So, for example, magnesium glycinate was always thought to go to the muscle, but we know that glycine goes to the muscle and relaxes the muscle and decreases excitation within the muscle. We know that glycine does it independently. You don't need magnesium to do that. So now they're saying the magnesium portion is universal. It's what it's bound to, which will associate to whatever your intention of that supplementation is supposed to be.
Right.
The one exception to that is magnesium L-threonate.
Yeah.
If you're a person who has a busy brain or an overexcited brain at nighttime,
And a lot of money.
Sorry.
Said and a lot of money.
And a lot of money. Because magnesium L-threonate is very expensive. But magnesium L-threonate, the molecule size is small enough to go through the blood-brain barrier. So it'll help to settle the brain and promote the production of serotonin in the evenings. Yeah. So that's the one exception. But everything else, magnesium taurine will go and do the thing for the heart, smooth muscle, anticontractile. Glycine will go and reduce excitation within the muscle, all of these things. But if I had to give you one, I've gone a huge spiel there, but it was for a purpose. Yeah. If I had to give you one answer, magnesium glycinate is a great universal applicator.
Yeah, cool. I'm glad we agree upon that. Yeah, solid. And so, like, essentially, it's like they're the universal, and then the rest of it is up to, like you said, assessment, essentially.
Yeah, it is up to assessment. Because not everyone, like, I wouldn't give pickle juice universally. There are some further ones, things like beet juice and stuff like that. Yeah. I would give some people, but beet juice, or beta vulgaris is more technically termed, is really specific to the person, and it'd be carnival base only.
Yeah, for a competition setting, for sure. Easy done. Well, if you guys liked the format in which that was done, feel free to send us some more questions, and we might even try and do this, like, I don't know how many episodes we're up to, but if we sort of do it every like couple of months where we can sort of just collate any of the questions that we get from previous episodes, and then that way we can sort of revisit some topics, because essentially that was what this was.